command line, and it goes ahead and starts up. So NodeRED is going to fire up a server that runs on 1888. You can visit that in your web browser, and you can see what it looks like, the development environment. And it's probably the best way to explain exactly what is NodeRED. So it is a JavaScript-based application. It runs JavaScript under Node.js on the server, and it has an extensive amount of JavaScript on the actual web page that you visit. This is the development environment. Wow, that doesn't look too great, does it? Let's see if I can zoom in. We'll go back to our default view. Now we're really zoomed in. Let's see. All right, we'll work with this. Okay, so when you visit the NodeRED homepage, you have a palette of objects here. I'm going to show you how to do a Hello World application in NodeRED. Each one of these objects that you see over on the left-hand side is a node. And if you were to look into this, you basically see JavaScript. All these node objects are JavaScript objects that have a visual representation. And the creator of NodeRED decided to come up with a protocol or a method to wrap all the JavaScript objects so that they can call each other. A typical node is kind of like a JavaScript function where you pass it a parameter, only they came up with a convention of passing one parameter, which is an object, and then having a number of properties attached to it. And just like a typical JavaScript function, you do have a return, or oftentimes a callback. So the JavaScript object in each one of these nodes can invoke a callback. So I'll show you what a typical JavaScript or a typical node object looks like. First, we start off with an injector and then a debug object. So the injector object, the best way to explain it, it's kind of like your main function. When you go ahead and you execute it, it's going to fire off and invoke another function. In this case, it's going to invoke a function passing a timestamp. Or you can have it pass a string. Like, for instance, I can say hello world here. And every object in the node environment has a settings panel that you can see on the right-hand side. Let me zoom in here. And so that's the properties panel or settings panel. And this is the object that I'm referring to, the timestamp object. Now, in order to have one JavaScript node object call another, instead of actually writing lines of code, you draw lines, you wire them together. It's kind of a new concept of, well, an old concept, but a popular concept now for creating programs in a codeless environment. So I'm going to draw a line here, a wire, if you will, is what they call it, from one object to the next. Now, this is the injector where I typed hello world, and then the message.payload is where it's going to take that hello world and put it into the message.payload JavaScript object. Now, this green one here that you're looking at, that's the debug window, or the console that you commonly see in the web browser. Now, if you click deploy here, it's going to basically compile that, put it up on the server, and I can press this little button over here, and we'll see what happens. And over here, we see hello world. Does that kind of make sense? All right. I don't know if I kind of lost you guys there. It's kind of an interesting programming concept.
So that inject item, that inject auto object, that's like just all it's saying is console log hello world?
Yeah, so basically you have this, so this inject object right here, I went ahead and wrote a string, and I told it to say hello world, and it's got a little button on it. It's the only object that's in this palette that has a button on it. When I click it, it's literally going to go ahead and invoke a function over the wire over whatever it's connected to. So if I connect it to the debug window by literally drawing a wire to it, and I click the button, we can see in the debug window, hello world comes out.
So the debug is actually saying console log?
Yeah, it's the equivalent of this is saying console.write or console.log.
Yeah.
So why is this interesting? Well, we see JavaScript being used a lot every day. If you look at Gutenberg, you're seeing a lot of JavaScript now. Somewhat controversial. But it's just going to happen, right? We're seeing tons and tons of it. And JavaScript can get really hairy. It can get really complex. And the NodeRED environment is really cool. It's kind of fun because, honestly, you really don't have to write code if you don't want to. You can write code, but a lot of the objects are very well documented. And there are a whole plethora, hundreds and hundreds of objects that are out there now that are well documented that you can use to wire and put together whatever kind of mashup you want. So just taking a quick look here, you can see there's an HTTP object, there's an MQTT object. These are objects that are used to turn on and off lights and various Internet of Things. But you can do this to create all sorts of web applications. The potential for NodeRED goes really beyond IoT. You can even write an application with it. So let me go ahead and show you what someone drew up here. There is a NodeRED Electron tool. Let's take a look here. Oh. So if I launch this Node Electron app, it is literally NodeRED wrapped up in Electron. How many people are familiar with Electron here? So Electron, just in short, for those of you who didn't raise your hand, it's basically the Chromium web browser. It's used to create applications using HTML and JavaScript. So if you ever use Slack or use the Atom editor, that is based on Electron. And so here we have Electron plus NodeRED. I'm going to fire up this demonstration app here. And it's going to show you a couple of widgets here, kind of cool things, a strip chart, you know, a little Blender control. We've got this a map that's embedded over here. We can even do audio.
Hello to Jason Isaacs. Hello to Jason Isaacs.
So if I switch into the development environment, you're going to see NodeRED there. Boom. And so the application that you just saw, with the little button that I pressed and the strip chart and what have you, was created by ensembling all of these little node objects. Here's a button. Press to talk. That's what's literally labeled. And it uses the text-to-speech. It's wired to the audio out, which is a speaker on your PC, and then it goes ahead and does its magic. So what I'm going to show you is a couple of objects that I've written for NodeRED that I use in the context of WordPress, because that's where we're all revolving back to, right? Okay, so let's see here. And this is the Electron application, as I mentioned. But NodeRED does run in your web browser, as we can see here. And I have a couple of objects. Let me jump back out. See if we have to reload that puppy. Okay. So the cool thing about NodeRED is not only is a palette of objects that we have here, it's also a package manager, or has a built-in package manager, access to one rather. So if I click on the right-hand side over here and click on Manage Palette, here's the list of all the objects that are out there. And I can literally search and install a few. One of the most popular, or one really popular object is a string object to manipulate strings. And this is one that I wrote 3 weeks ago, but it's gotten a whole heck of a lot of downloads. 226 in the last day, 3,761. It's basically just a way to manipulate strings in the NodeRED environment. But we're going to install that puppy. And then how many people here are familiar with Selenium or Phantom.js? Okay. So real quick, Selenium and Phantom.js is a way to automate a web browser. Phantom.js is a headless web browser, just like a web browser that you use, like Chrome or Safari, but it has no user interface. You access it through code. And people commonly use it for web scraping or browser testing and doing a number of things that they want to automate on the web. Well, one of the issues is that Phantom.js is kind of old, and it really doesn't follow the latest standards. And there's a new project out there called NightmareJS, and I think you can kind of sense the theme here. NightmareJS.com, I believe. Let's take a look. Oh, not coming up. Could be. Nope. So where I'm going with this is that NightmareJS is a very simple API that's a little bit more geared towards doing like web scraping and automation. So you can see how what it took to write a body of code in PhantomJS versus NightmareJS. And basically what we're doing here is we're visiting Yahoo, we're clicking the search button, and we're typing GitHub Nightmare for our search query. And you can do it in basically 4 lines of code. Well, I ported NightmareJS over to NodeRED, so now you can do it in no lines of code. Let me go ahead and show you how that's done. And we'll install that guy. Once I install these nodes, they're grabbing them from GitHub, and now they're putting them in my development environment. You'll see they'll appear on the palette over here on the left-hand side. So Nightmare is based on Electron. It uses the Electron browser, but there is a way to run it so that it is headless, or optionally you can actually see the web browser and interact with it. What's really cool about this is that you can deploy it and scale it. You can actually take Electron and download it, create your web automation routine and upload it to something like Lambda on AWS. Even though Lambda has a limit, a file size limit, there's a way around it with using some of the AWS, there are other services to get it rolling. Let's go ahead and take a look at NBrowser real fast. I can show you what we're doing with it. So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to put together a workflow that's already been created. Let me shut down this server. Okay. Restart our server. Okay, our server started. We're going to go visit our local web browser. Boom. Okay. So I've created a workflow here using the NBrowser object. And let me show you how I would do it in a basic sense. So I've got my injector object. I'm going to pass it a string, which is going to be a URL. So say, for instance, we want to visit the example website that's being hosted under desktop server. And I click Done. And then I've got my NBrowser object, which is located under Advanced. And I'm going to send that string, the URL, over to the NBrowser object. And within NBrowser, we have a number of properties. We can show the browser window instance. Then we can apply a couple of methods, like go to URL, whatever is in the message.payload. That came from the injector object. So let's go ahead and fire this puppy up. Click deploy. If I click this little button here, we'll see the Electron browser fire up, and then it visits the www.example.dev, which just happens to be a WordPress website. Okay, so everybody following along? Okay, cool. So this is the Electron browser. It does have all the development tools embedded into it. If I hit Alt-Command-I, we can see our familiar JavaScript console. I can inspect objects and see what's going on around here. So say, for instance, I'm going to go to the admin page. I'll just update that to go to admin, redeploy, fire it up. Now, it takes a little bit to fire up, but when you're running in headless mode, it's blazingly fast, because headless mode isn't going to download all the images. It's not going to process or crunch all that. NBrowser, or the Nightmare project, is designed for speed, and supposedly is quite a bit faster than PhantomJS. Now, let's take a look here. So in NodeRED, I have the option to go ahead and take a complex workflow, highlight it, and turn it into a subroutine. If I were to do that, I can create a subflow based on the selection here, and it adds all of those nodes, say those were dozens of nodes, into another node on my palette. And the reason why I point that out is because I've got a specific node that is rather complex called query updates. And if you look at it, it's going to visit the WordPress admin URL. It's going to use the HTML node to parse it. It's going to click on, let's take a look inside. It's going to click on the user login. It's going to type the username, click on the user password, type the user password, hit submit, wait for the content to arrive. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to check for updates. So let me show you an example here. How many people here use Managed WP? Or what's that other, oh God. Yeah, Infinite WP. So a lot of those aggregating programs basically allow you to manage your WordPress websites all from one central location, which is pretty cool. Granted, they do require you install a specific plugin and do some registration and do all sorts of stuff like that. And some hosting providers just really don't like it. I think WP Engine or a few other hosting providers, maybe I shouldn't name ones, kind of balk at installing third-party plugins to do any management. They want you to use their control panel. But by using this workflow here that I've created, you can automate that process. So let's take a look at the first example. Website. And let me explode this out here. Okay. Is that right? Oh, here we go. I'm going to show the browser so you can see exactly what's going on. There we go. So when I hit this timestamp here, it's going to visit the example website. It's going to log us in, and it's going to navigate over to, oh, you know what, I made it too fast. Let's not close out the web browser. And we'll fire off again. Okay, so what I've done is I've logged into my WordPress website, and I've gone and I've looked for the updates tag and see if it's present. And if it's present, I am going to write it out to the debug window. Oh, no, I'm not. I am going to instead write it to the dashboard. Okay. A couple of those other nodes allow you to create web pages, and so now you can see the workflow process that says my example website has one plugin update, if that makes sense. Now, if I were to go ahead and aggregate that, I could create a whole list of sites just by dropping in more nodes and running them. Oh, you got to deploy first. Redeploy, let's do that again. Nope. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and fire off 3 websites. And one of them doesn't actually respond, but that's just for a demo. Shoot, all right, I already updated the other one. So basically, if you were to list a bunch of websites, this program would show you all your websites and what all needs to be updated. you could easily write another button to go automate the process of going out to your website, clicking update, and update them. Now this works on a hosting provider that's relatively slow. Say you're using a budget hosting provider that doesn't give you access to WP-CLI. Because in an ideal world, we would use WP-CLI to go ahead and update all these websites. Or we would use a third-party product like Managed WP with seat licenses and what have you. But this is just kind of a foray into showing you how you can automate your own. The other thing that NodeRED does, it's pretty cool, is it does have a number of objects that allow you to do access to the REST API. So how many people here have actually worked with WP REST? Okay, cool. Can you think of any tools that you use to help you develop that process? I know there's a number of plugins out there for web browsers that allow you to simulate REST API calls. Can't think of the one off the top of my head. There's a couple for Chrome and Firefox.
Postman.
Yeah, Postman, really popular. Okay, well, you can do the same thing in Postman as you can do in NodeRED. Here's an example. Let's take a look here. So say, for instance, I want to use my timestamp object to kick off a process. And we've got an HTTP node. And from within here, I can do a get, I can do a post, I can do a put, I can put a delete. I can return the JSON object that comes back from the REST API. You can see the URL here. We'll see if this guy actually works. If I wanted to do authentication, I can do a basic authentication, install the authentication plugin on my WordPress website and gain access to do that. Let's go ahead and fire this up. Hit deploy. Lastly, I'm going to output to the debug window. So we should see something come out here. Okay, there we go. JSON error. But we basically got the Xdebug error notice. Xdebug error. Call stack. What have I done? Let's take a quick peek. Now we're doing a get. We're turning a UTF object. Let's try that one more time. No, that's an error message. That isn't JSON there. Notice, undefined index.
It says there's no undefined index, HTTP user agent. Cross-browser.
Ah, you know what it is? Let me go ahead and take a look here. I think I dropped in the authentication. That's what I did. As a global plugin. So in Desktop Server, you can install WordPress plugins and have them work all across your sites. We don't want that. So this is just an example of a WordPress website. Let's give that a try. Damn. Not gonna work for me. Can we get the first post? We cannot. JSON parse error. So let's just return a string. Haha, well, this did work offline. It's not working now. I'm not quite sure why. But yeah, you'll just have to trust me on this one. So you can take the HTTP objects, you can do authentication. I've also got a demo over here of deleting a post. Let's see if that guy's going to fire. Nope, JSON parse error. Well, if we have any REST API professionals out there, you can come back and talk to me, and maybe we can debug this and figure out what's going on. But yeah, so that's a basic introduction to NodeRED. You've seen how you can automate processes using the end-browser object, which is the Nightmare project, basically represented as a node in the environment. We've written virtually no code in order to accomplish this task. Any questions? Yeah.
So, given that this is a node project, do you know if there are any or think there will be online cloud-based versions of this? Or?
Yeah, so I did mention that NodeRED started from IBM's research. And if you go to IBM's Bluemix project, which is kind of like their Amazon services, you can deploy a NodeRED application. You can sign up for the free service. Just like Amazon, it's pretty competitive in terms of giving you a pretty liberal amount of space and processor time. And you can sign up and actually run NodeRED. So if you don't want to run it locally, you don't want to install Node.js on your machine, you can do it on IBM's Bluemix. So just do a Google on Bluemix and it'll come up. NodeRED is one of the projects that you can click on, have it install, and then you'll get your login information. Obviously here, I just visited the website URL. There's nothing to log in. It just took me right there. But it's pretty secure in that respect. I can show you a quick GIF of what's coming to, I know, right? I could use a cat right now. Come on, baby. There we go. So NodeRED is in its infancy. Version 1.0, however, is going to drop in December. So everything that you've looked at is all beta. Maybe that explains why the JSON's not working right, but it was working a little while earlier. In it is coming the ability to do Git. So Git is integrated in it. Someone has already written a node that does Git. So if you drop that in your flow, you can just click that and it'll take your workflow. By the way, everything that's produced, all these nodes that you're looking at, generates JSON, including your function objects and what have you. But you can just click a button and then submit that to a Git repo. And you can see here it's integrated natively off to the right. You can do a commit history. You've got the remote history. I think at this point he clicks. Yeah, the contrast on the screen is pretty bad, but it's basically showing you a differential between what's changed in his workflow. But so, for instance, down here, everything gets serialized to JSON. For instance, you can actually take a function node, pop it in there, and start writing your JavaScript. If you configure the settings correctly, you can actually just do a require and immediately start utilizing objects that are out on the node repo. So pretty cool, pretty powerful in that respect. All right, so that was just a quick crash course into NodeRED and how you can use it to automate some things in real life. Anyone else? Questions? Yeah, you can go ahead and do that. So for instance, if I take this check objects or check for updates, and if I highlight all of this, and by the way, the environment's really intuitive in terms of the debugger. If I roll over this debug section here, you can't see it too well on the screen. The contrast isn't too great, but you can see the object that generated the error is going to highlight in the node environment. It'll actually outline in red. But to answer your original question, I can actually select all the nodes here. Reduce, select it, Control A, and you can import or export. You can import and export to your library, which exists as a text file in your user documents, or you can export it to a clipboard. And we can go ahead and just make it formatted so it's nice and pretty. And from there, you can actually see the code that it's generating. So you'll see a lot of XY coordinates because it's going to record the wires that you used in order to connect your objects, which is basically how you're calling functions. But flow-based programming in itself is pretty evolutionary in the way that we do things. It's kind of a Minority Report, like matrix way that you just drag and drop objects, and kind of the future of programming. And to be quite honest with you, I spent some time with my nieces booting up an old Commodore 64 and doing Hello World. And she got a real kick